And welcome to Civil Discourse. I'm Jayme Marilyn.
And I'm Marilyn Brown.
And today we are discussing minimalism. We had talked about it. It came up I think 2 weeks ago. And it was something we wanted to talk about a little bit more. I have a quote for everybody. And that quote's by Joshua Becker, who's the author of The More of Less. And the quote is, "Let's stop trying to impress others with the things that we own and start trying to inspire them by the lives that we live."
Ooh, I really like that one. That's a
I
good one.
know it's funny because we were discussing this topic and what we want to talk about, and I follow Joshua on Facebook, and he posted an article he just wrote, and that was one of the quotes in the article.
Oh,
Um,
that's perfect.
yeah, and it was about the article specifically was kind of about five things he saw as material things people are attached to that block them from being mindful.
Mm,
And he was, there was, I mean, it was anything from focusing on the idea of retirement to the way we post photos on social media and our addiction kind of with selfies and
hmm
um,
And
I think a
documenting.
right, and I think a lot of
Yeah.
a big misconception about minimalism is that it's about not buying things or not owning things, and really it's really not about how much material possession you have. It's more about your uh, mindset and mental attachment to those things. Minimalism's much more kind of to me at least, is a worldview where you don't where you don't identify yourself with material possession, your self worth or other self worth. Um, yeah.
hmm Tell me, kind of thinking about like the misconceptions, because I would definitely say that I subscribe to those misconceptions about minimalism and not really just kind of equating it with not having a lot of stuff, and not really thinking about that broader perspective. But I'm wondering how did minimalism start for you? Like how did you kind of even find that you were inclined to be a minimalist, or like how did you kind of, you know, yeah,
Right.
how did you get here?
I think for me it was very uh, natural, and I was very much a minimalist before I even knew what the word was. Like even growing up, I much preferred um, experience based things versus material things. I never really wanted many things. I would
Okay.
much rather take a class, or I want to go explore this place or go on this vacation, which is in its own type of um, it can be its own type of materialism
Session. Yeah.
in possession.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I think it depends on what, again, the worldview. And I think for me it was more about the experience and the the growth and the feelings I got doing those experiential things, as opposed to it me saying I'm going on vacation to impress people or to make it seem like I'm worthy, or that I'm
Interesting.
rich, or whatever, what
Yeah.
interesting, whatever it is. Sh- it wasn't about ego in the way of me trying to be better than others. And I think that's a lot where the foundation of materialism,
Yeah.
which for me is the opposite of minimalism, comes from. Materialism is very much about ego and needing these things to prove
Mhm.
something, whether that be your own self-worth or superiority to others. Um, yeah, I don't think I really answered your question, but
I mean, kind of, but you went down an interesting road that I think, I want to talk about a little bit is just that idea of materialism. And I think that, we are so conditioned to have this kind of material need. And I think that you're right, that it's about, kind of where is that coming from? What's the driving force behind acquiring these things or even experiences? Because I definitely agree that you can be materialistic about experiences where you're kind of just acquiring them to have. And so, I think that it's interesting thinking about how we've been conditioned to view these things as something to be proud of or something to, and the ego really thrives in that. The ego really thrives in kind of comparing to others and finding itself, superior or valid in the eyes of others. And I think that it sounds to me like, I don't think that this was for you because you, like you said, were more naturally inclined to it, but it sounds to me like minimalism kind of grows from having a more mindful perspective, not necessarily always, but I could just imagine that may increase someone's inclination towards minimalism,
right.
just
Yeah.
kind of that moving away from that ego-centered need for validation.
Yeah. There's two, and I don't consider myself an expert on minimalism by any means. It's just I tend to live very minimalistically. So people like to ask me about it because they think it's weird. But I think there's two kind of ways people find it, and one is what you're talking about, and kind of I think how I found it was minimalism was kind of this secondary thing to my mindfulness practice. It
Mm-hmm.
kind of just evolved naturally the more I practice mindfulness, and for other people, I think they find mindfulness in um, trying minimalism. So
Mm-hmm.
they'll try to throw things out or try to um, uh, go for small houses are all the rage now, like things like that, and then they find the mindfulness from um, making the choice to let go of whatever material thing they're letting go of. And I think it's like everything else. I think a lot of people think that minimalism's about like just throwing everything away, and it's a lot like mindfulness where it's a process, and it's in the culture we live in where everything is very much about advertising and about materialistic things, and everything in our culture tells us that self-worth is about how much you own and needing more and more and more. It can be actually detrimental um, emotionally and mentally to try to quit material things cold turkey. Um,
Right.
it can be psychologically overwhelming,
Mm-hmm.
and so it is a process. And like I
Mm-hmm.
said, I own things. There's things that um, I want and things that I need just to be able to do the career I want to do and communicate the way I want to do and just the lifestyle I enjoy. But I think the big difference is I try not to attach my self-worth or my identity to any of those things. And in trying to do that, the result is that I tend to want less things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that that makes a lot of sense to me. And when you were talking about just kind of that natural process that kind of evolved for you, it it makes sense that it's not, like you're not saying I have nothing and I have no need for things, but it's almost just kind of, I'm hearing, not like you haven't said this, but almost just also being aware of what you need and being aware of kind of taking what you need or taking what is going to be of use for you and being mindful in that way. I think there's a mindfulness to, getting rid of things and recognizing maybe if you have too much stuff. But I also think there's a mindfulness in kind of thinking about and a minimalist mindset to thinking about, do I actually need this or why am I taking this? Because I think that we're, again, kind of just so conditioned to just want to acquire things and a lot of times not even really know why,
Mm-hmm.
not even really think about like, do I need this new version of this thing that I have, the old working version of just certain things like that. But I think that, like you said, we're kind of, really just so conditioned to want that next thing and be seeking something from it. And actually it goes back to when you were talking about the article and he was saying about retirement, um, the author, and he was saying about how people will attach themselves to this idea of retirement. So even just attaching yourself to an idea of an experience that you're trying to acquire, something that's still an attachment. And so that in and of itself kind of pulls you out of that mindfulness. And I think that that's the part that we can all evaluate about what we have in our own life and what we have acquired is that kind of, okay, well, what's my attachment? What's my relationship to this? Why am I attached to this? And what does that look like? And what would I feel like if I didn't have this?
Right, and I think at the end of the day, minimalism and and mindfulness are t- two sides of the same coin. In that mindfulness is minimalism. What are you doing when you're meditating? You're stripping away everything to just your breath. It's the most minimalistic we can get to life to explore ourselves, and that's what happens when you live a minimalist lifestyle. And it doesn't have to, I mean, it can be going on a mindfulness retreat is a minimalist lifestyle for that time you're on
Mm,
it, and it forces you to be present with yourself as opposed to, I think, the material, the reason we attach our self-worth and our identities to these things is because they're distractions, and
mhm.
they distract us from dealing with our own feelings and our own inner life.
Yes.
And when those things are either taken away from you or you start living without them, you're actually able to go inward and explore those feelings and that inner life in a way that's very difficult when you have all those distractions.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very true. I'm as we're talking about this, I'm thinking, how do you, or do you have any tips for someone who's interested in minimalism and maybe interested, I think for myself, my own practice with mindfulness has led me to being more interested in minimalism and kind of feeling wasteful in
Mm-hmm.
certain areas of my life and being more mindful of like, what I take and what I bring into my home and things like that. But I'm wondering like, do you have any kind of practical tips for somebody who is not a minimalist, but is, on that journey and wanting to be more mindful in that way?
Right. Yeah, there's a few different things. One is if you have a mindfulness practice, a meditation practice, a yoga practice, the first thing I always say is to find a designated space for that practice. So if you have an extra room where that's where you meditate, make that a minimalist room with maybe just nothing in it, or just your meditation cushion, or whatever the bare um, minimum is for you to do that inner exploration,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
just live in that space. And I think it teaches you then um, what what kind of embracing minimalism feels like, and then you can bring that into other rooms and slowly move through.
Yeah.
If you feel it's necessary, again, it's not about getting rid of everything. It's
Hmm.
about not having those attachments, and sometimes that's enough, is having a space where you have none of those attachments, and then when you enter a new space, the things that you were once attached to, you start to discover that
Hmm.
they are not actually who you are, and they don't give you the self-worth that you thought they did.
Yeah, yeah. I love that suggestion. And as soon as you said it, I started smiling because just randomly this week I just did that in my space. I like had an extra yoga mat and I was like, I just really want to put this in my room and put this into my meditation space and have it rolled out so that when I want to go in and I want to be able to do that, that I can. And it's not a, something where I have to clear out some space to do it or anything like that. And just going in there and going into that room, and it's the brightest room in my house. It's where I get the most natural light. The windows are open. There's very little stuff in there because I try to keep my bedroom pretty clear. And just seeing that mat laid out on the floor just kind of changed my energy and just kind of made me feel more interested and inclined to want to kind of actually use it and sit down in times where I wouldn't have planned to. And so that was really cool. So it's funny that that was your first suggestion because I just randomly did that.
Right, and the other option too is if you don't have the space to do that. I mean, I'm in Los Angeles. I know a lot of people who live in studio apartments, and it's just cluttered because they're living in a very small
Yeah.
space. Is nature is the best
Mm-hmm.
minimalistic place ever. So go to a park, and the important part is don't bring your phone, don't bring a bag. Don't bring anything extra. Just go and meditate. You can bring your meditation cushion if you want, but
Mm-hmm.
just go and meditate and spend some time without anything. No jewelry, no just basic clothing, nothing you're attached to or that you find. I mean, if you look in the mirror and your first thought is like, do I look good? Do I not? That's an attachment to clothing. So nothing that makes you
Mm-hmm.
feel in that vein, I would say neutral, something that makes you just feel very neutral.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the other
So like
option.
they would recommend like when you're going to retreat, they kind of recommend like kind of loose, neutral clothing, that kind of thing. So
Right.
like the
Yeah.
same kind of idea about it that you don't want to be attached to your appearance
Yeah. And
and
it's,
that.
it's, it's individual. I mean, I know a lot of people who go to yoga class or meditation class, and they put a lot of effort into what they're going to wear because they care about how others perceive them. So they try to look their best going to work out,
Mhm.
and that's a whole other topic. And there's no shame or negative in that. It's just that an attachment to um, a materialistic thing and idea. You're using clothing to not, and that's slightly different in that I don't think you're necessarily attaching your identity to that. You're trying to shift the perception of your identity with
Mm,
clothing in that
that
specific
specific
instance,
example.
which
Yeah.
within minimalism you kind of want to strip, and mindfulness you want to strip that that
Hmm.
away.
Yeah. That one's a tough one for me because I'm like, I get what you're saying and I think that there have definitely been times where I will get dressed to go work out, worried about how I look to everybody else. But I also think for me, and I think for some people it doesn't do that. And I think, but for some people, the way you dress and kind of your outward appearance really is a way that you kind of reflect what's going on the inside. And so it's like, I I won't say every day I put a lot of thought in it, but it's more of just kind of I like choose what I'm feeling that day and kind of put together what I wear to yoga class based on like the mood that I'm in and what I'm feeling. And I'll look in the mirror and think, okay, this feels good or I feel good about this, but it's like less about kind of worried about perception of others, but more just kind of wanting to feel like the inside matches the outside because that's kind of where I feel the most effective in the world is when I'm succinct in that way.
Right, and I think that's why awareness and mindfully asking yourself the question is important of why.
Yes.
I mean, we're kind of shifting topic, but yeah, just exploring it for yourself
Right.
because um, Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
yeah, on the topic of what to wear, I think we're on the same page. Is just what makes you feel mindful,
Yes.
if that,
Yes. Yeah. Because I can
without
definitely
adding
recognize
extra
a time
baggage
where,
to it.
right. Because I can definitely recognize a time where it wasn't mindful and where, you know, if I was so unmindful about it that it could ruin the experience if I didn't feel, you know, like I was being perceived in the way I wanted to. And so, yeah, I think it's about kind of exploring that in the moment and really evaluating for yourself, what is this for
Right.
me?
And
Yeah.
again, even with minimalism, so much of it, it's like mindfulness in that it's about awareness. It's not about judgment. And the reality is that clothing, in the way our society uses them, is not really about shelter or protection or warmth in most places. It's about style. It's about reflecting our personalities and things like
Yes.
that. And I think it's important to recognize that,
Yeah. Less
because
about function.
yeah, it's not saying that if you want to express yourself through your clothing that something's wrong with that, but about just having the awareness that clothing is a material thing you are using to express yourself. It is not who you actually are. That's where the
Yes.
division is,
Yeah.
and then you can make a mindful choice for yourself to express yourself in your clothing in a mindful way, and not in a way that's leading with attachment or fear or ego or any of these negative kind of expressions.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Other tips? Other things
I
you
did. What was my other tip? My other Oh, I had one and now I can't remember. Yeah, my other tip would be just to do some start off with doing some self-reflection and exploring what situations make you feel mindful. Um, and then once you have that awareness, to bring that to your shopping habits. So when you actually are purchasing something, ask yourself if that will help lead to a more mindful life or not. Is it? I think it's the same with everything we talk about. It's about
yeah.
asking yourself the right questions and deep questions
Mm-hmm.
to know why you're behaving the way you're behaving, as opposed to just um, reacting off instinct and conditioning. And I think I do that a, a lot when I'm going to buy anything, or I'm in a place and I'm like, ooh, I want that. And then I always will stop, because I've conditioned myself to do it, to say, is that something I need? Is that something that's going to help me be more mindful? Or is that just something uh, I want because I've seen a commercial and I'm adding self-worth because of the commercial and the advertising and all these
Mm-hmm.
things? And then I make a decision based on actually having that dialogue um, with myself. And I don't always make the right decision, but the having the dialogue is the first step. And as soon as
Yes.
you are able to do that and are conscious of it, it's much easier to make the right choice for you.
Yes. Yeah.
And the
I
for
like
you is
it.
an important part.
What's that?
I said the for you is the important part, because there is no right and wrong in it. Some person owning something doesn't make them um, uh, materialistic.
Right.
It's the identifying, or the way you use that
Hmm.
object,
Yeah.
that can be good or bad, if you
Right.
will.
Right. And I think is it for you? And also, is it for you right now? Because I think there are times where, you know, it would be a mindful decision to, you know, acquire something, but maybe at this moment it's not. And so kind of realizing, being mindful of, not only is this for me, but is this for me right now? Is this, you know, is this the appropriate time for this? And I also think, like, I like that, asking yourself that question, and realizing that the way change works, when we're changing, we don't just, decide right now, okay, I'm going to start asking myself that question. And then I'm going to, after this episode, every time I buy something, I'm going to think about that. But even if I ask myself that question after it's happened or a week late, even if it takes time, that's how change happens. And so I think kind of realizing that whenever you are willing to like look inward and ask about it, and kind of you're going to condition yourself to actually use that skill and to be more mindful when in the moment when it happens, but realizing that's a kind of a gradual process, even just having the awareness to like ask yourself that in the moment.
Right. And I think it's there's a lot of things with mindfulness, and you had talked last week when me and you were chatting about spring cleaning, and I think that's another thing I've noticed with other people who lead a very minimalistic lifestyle is spring cleaning is very important to us. And it's very much what you're talking about. It's about looking at all the things you've acquired and
Mhm.
saying, with where I am now, can I let any of these things go?
Yeah.
And it's a great way to test where you're at, and
Uh-huh.
your mindfulness, and what your level of attachment is to certain things, because there's definitely many things that I do own that I have sentimental attachment to for various reasons.
Hmm.
And I mean, I guess you could debate if all attachment is bad, but at least in my opinion, it's not that attachment is bad. It's looking at what the attachment means. It's looking deeper. Is it I'm attached to this because it reminds me of something that makes me more mindful, that makes me more compassionate, that brings me hope, these positive things, or is it something that distracts me from self-exploration and from feelings I don't want to be feeling, and these things. And then within that kind of dialogue with myself, you learn a lot about who you are and where you're at, and it's helps you cope with things that you're struggling with, and thrive where things are going well. So I think that's another uh, tip is just the idea of spring cleaning and having kind of a time where you consciously go through the things
Yeah.
that you've acquired through your life.
Yeah. I think spring cleaning is an important, I don't know if you need to exactly do it in spring. I don't know, but just this
Right.
time where you're going through and reflecting. I mean, I think springtime is a good time to do it, but I also think that, whenever that is, that you're periodically going through what you have and evaluating, is it contributing, to my life, my well-being, what I want to do in this world, or is it cluttering, because I think there's a lot of times that we just, we're constantly moving forward and things are constantly changing. And so there's stuff that, just ends up kind of creating clutter. And I know for myself, I'm a very sentimental person, and I want to hold on to things and keep mementos, but I also just find myself being overwhelmed with clutter and um, feeling blocked, like mentally, when there's just
Hmm.
kind of too much stuff, too many papers, just things like that, where I feel like it really kind of blocks my energy and my ability to create and my ability to do things. And so I think that, you know, and you don't really realize it until you actually do the spring cleaning and kind of start to clear out the clutter and then experience what it feels like to not have it there. So it's one of those things where the environment really can block you, but your awareness of it can be really, you can be completely unaware of it. And so I do think that just kind of getting into that habit where you periodically do it is a good way to keep yourself kind of constantly thinking about what do I have, and how is this serving me? It's one of those things where like I remember as a kid, we would have this whole big spring cleaning, and usually it would happen during spring break. And it was kind of this thing. And my mom would get all excited about it. And I was like, this is such a drag. Like, why are we doing this? Like, we don't have that much to, why? But I realize now why, why those things were important and why we periodically did them. Because if you don't do it, you're going to constantly end up, just acquiring a lot of stuff and being a little overwhelmed with it and not even realizing it.
Right. The other thing I've noticed as a common trait among um, most, really, if not all, the minimalists I I know is the use of nature. We talked about it a little bit
Mm-hmm.
earlier, but I think even if you're living a minimalistic lifestyle, it's again just like mindfulness in that because our society is very much the opposite. It can get overwhelming, and it becomes almost a constant. I don't want to use the word struggle, but it makes it more difficult because you can never truly relax. You're always kind of on guard in a way,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the reason nature is so important is because it's naturally minimalistic. So you can kind of let go of the shield you have up against um, kind of the culture that's fighting what your own self-exploration, if that makes sense. So I
Yeah.
think walking, taking walks to the park, just doing, and it doesn't have to be, some people just don't like nature. It's just anything where you are actually separated from material things. And I think the
Mm-hmm.
important, again, is not necessarily that material things are bad. It's the way um, we we use them.
It's our
They're
relationship.
just tools. Yeah, it's our relationship with them, and I think that relationship becomes very clear when we are in nature.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking, I don't know that this is one of your suggestions, but I was thinking it could be helpful even just to like create some kind of structure for yourself where once a week you like spend some time in a minimalist kind of mindset, or kind of, where you go outside and do something in nature, don't take your phone, don't take any of your stuff with you, and just spend some time there and just kind of allow yourself to like see what that feels like. And then, go back to your stuff, go back to your computer, but be able to allow yourself that retreat as a way to experience it in a way that's not so overwhelming and doesn't feel like, we're like telling you to sell all your stuff and move into a tiny house.
Right, and it's minimalism is difficult because for the same reason mindfulness is difficult is in that it forces us to question um, our self identities and what we are identifying as self. And I think it's important to have um, spaces and experiences that um, help shape that shifted worldview and view of self. And nature seems to be a very useful
Mm-hmm.
um, way to do that. And I think it's just because I think a lot of it has to do with the reality that nature is non-dualistic. Everything's connected, and whether we are consciously aware of it or not, there's something innate in humans where when we are in nature, we feel it, even if we're not consciously aware of it. And when we specifically living in cities, and when you're constantly separated from that nature, you get the you start to believe that the disconnection is true because you're living in an environment that is very much disconnected.
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah.
Yeah, that it made when you were talking about that, it makes me think about um on like reality shows where they'll take people. out camping for a weekend or something, and there's always people that are like, I hate nature, I hate bugs, I don't do outside and all that stuff. And inevitably, every single time, they settle and they end up leaving feeling different and having an experience that they haven't experienced, and especially when it's somebody who's grown up without experiencing any kind of, nature that's not like just a city park or something. It's just so interesting because you do see that where people will feel like, oh, it's not, nature's not for me. But I don't know that I've actually met somebody that hasn't spent some time in it and felt like it was for them,
Right.
and
And I,
that connection once they let go of the attachments to like, where's my phone or what's going on with my stuff, and kind of actually allow themselves to settle into that feeling. It affects all of us in a,
right. And
I think, in a positive way.
yeah,
Or
I
it
think it's,
affects us. Yeah.
I think you're so spot on because I find, I mean, this is a mass generalization, but yeah, most people who I know who say they don't like nature and have all these excuses, I think it's because they have functioned in an environment that is at a completely different pace that they're comfortable with. That when they go into nature and it's a slower, I think, calmer environment, it makes them uncomfortable, and I think that's what they're expressing is that the uncomfortableness with that
Mhm.
calmness.
Yeah.
But when they're actually um, thrust into it and have to kind of sit in that environment, and they start to see the relaxation and the changes that happen, it does change them. They get more. I mean, it's no longer fear based because they're experiencing it.
Yeah, yeah, I had that personal experience myself, growing up in Chicago. I never went camping. I didn't have any real experience with nature other than kind of conditioning of other people saying, "Oh, I don't like it, it's dirty." And so I I didn't think I liked nature. I didn't think I would love to go camping and that it would become one of my favorite things and something that like I have to prescribe to myself to do periodically so that I can, feel grounded and feel good. But it's one of those things where I didn't know. And it was fear, it was, am I going to know how to do this right? Am I, all those kinds of uncomfortable emotions, but realizing that once I experienced it, all that melted away.
Yeah, and I think too for anyone who's listening or watching who's in the nature's not for me crowd, the thing I have noticed also is the more people practice mindfulness or meditation, the more connected to nature they become. And I've known a ton of people who um, were not into hated camping, hated
Mhm.
all of those things very passionately, and started meditating regularly and having a mindfulness practice, and um, they begrudgingly somehow got into nature, and
Mhm.
it all kind of like melted away. All of that
Mhm.
very quickly in a
Yeah.
way that, I mean, they literally entered nature and there was an immediate shift, not like 3 days later where you're finally like, okay, this is okay, I
Right. It
guess.
was immediate.
Because I
Yeah.
think a lot of it too has to do with your own resistance,
Uh-huh. How
and how
and
much there is. Because yeah, if you have a lot of resistance to it and you're attached to that resistance, you can spend a year in nature and nothing's going to change because that resistance is going to stop you. And as long as you're not able to let that go, you're it's going to be there.
right, right. Well, this was awesome. I feel like I learned
Good,
a
good.
lot, and I'm wondering, like, for our listeners and viewers, what would be a good follow-up kind of question for them?
um, I kind of want to take this, I think, in a different direction than I normally would. And what I would love to know is the just talk about the object or the idea that you're attached to the most, and starting there, like what is that thing where you put your identity in, or that has a lot of worth, to you that's an external thing, whether that's an idea or an actual materialistic thing. Because I think that's the first step. It's easy to ask people to say, oh, when was the time you were in a minimalistic environment and how did you feel? That's not where the exploration starts. It
Right.
starts in the world we're in now, which is a materialistic world. And
Yeah.
that's normally what I ask myself, even living as a minimalist, is what am I attached to, and why.
And
So
why? Yeah, I love that. That's a good
so what are
question.
you attached to,
Just
and why is the question.
nice. Well, I'm already thinking about that one for myself, so I'll be excited to hear what everybody thinks. So
Yes,
that's a really good one.
and everyone can join us on Facebook, on our group. It's Mindfulness in Action Civil Discourse, and we can have the dialogue there. And you can follow us on social media at CivilDTV.
Thank you guys. See you
Okay.
next time.
Have a good one.